Hello, everyone, and welcome to altPOV.radio. Our guest today is Christopher O'Brien. Many of you have probably heard of Christopher or have read some of his books. Chris, basically from 1992 to 2002, he investigated and logged hundreds of unexplained events reported in the San Luis Valley. And for those of you who don't know, the San Luis Valley is located in south central Colorado, north central New Mexico. And during that time period, Chris worked with law enforcement officials from area counties, ex-military members, ranchers, and an extensive network of skywatchers and investigators. And what he did was he documented what really a lot of people believe to be the most extensive wave of unexplained activity ever seen in a single region of North America. And the result of his 10-plus years of investigating that region resulted in 3 books that he wrote, a trilogy, if you will: The Mysterious Valley, Enter the Valley, and Secrets of the Mysterious Valley. His field investigations of these UFO reports, unexplained livestock deaths, Native American legends, cryptozoological animals, secret military activity, and the folklore found in the world's largest alpine valley has produced one of the largest databases of unusual occurrences gathered from a single geographic region. And I had heard about Chris's books years ago, and that's the first book I bought was Secrets of the Mysterious Valley, and I went from there. He has a new book out called Stalking the Herd, and it truly is one of the most comprehensive books ever written on the subject of cattle mutilations. And we're going to talk about that book, and we're going to talk about his other books and what he learned from those experiences. And he also, his recent book that came out, I believe in 2009, if I'm not mistaken, is Stalking the Tricksters, which I also want to talk a little bit about, because what Chris does in that book is he basically takes years of field investigation and research and applies it to a theory, unified field theory, that attempts to address the apparent interrelatedness between all of these paranormal phenomena. Chris has been on dozens of TV shows and hundreds of radio programs around the world. He won in 2012 won 2 EBE Film Festival Awards for his associate producer on the documentary It Could Happen Tomorrow. So please join me in welcoming Christopher O'Brien. Hello, Chris. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, no problem. Thanks for having me on, Jack.
It really is a pleasure. I've known about you for so long, and I have to say I really do admire your work because you're so thorough in everything that you do. And you also have a really nice writing style that makes it easy to read really all the detailed research that you conduct. So I just want to lead in by saying that because I really do enjoy your work.
Yeah. I do try to keep it as conversational as possible, but well, I'll tell you that chapter 0, the first chapter in Stalking the Tricksters, that was rough.
Well, and that's people don't realize how hard it is. You could research and investigate all you want, but to really to put something down, not only on paper but in readable form, so that everyone can understand and get a feel for what's going on, because sometimes it is really complicated. And we'll get into this when we talk about the Stalking the Herd, because I was blown away by just the amount of information, but it was all very relevant information on cattle mutilations and cattle and cows and the history of all of that. So, but let's start from the beginning. From 1992 to 2002, you basically investigated the San Luis Valley. Tell us how this started for you. How did it all start?
Well, it kind of started pretty innocently, really. I was a gigging musician. I've been a keyboard player for many years, and at the time, I had a fairly, well-established and popular cover band. We did some originals, but mostly covers. And the weekend of Thanksgiving, November '92, I was was away out of town playing, and a pretty significant UFO event occurred over the little town of Crestone in the Baca Grande subdivision next door where I lived. And, over the next month or so, I heard little rumblings here and there. I talked to a couple of people. who had seen it, had seen these two objects that evidently had come down from the Sangre de Cristos, which are this, the longest mountain range, continuous mountain range in North America. And right behind the little town I lived in were like 14,000-foot mountains and a whole chain of mountains. And evidently these 200-foot ovals, as they were described, came down out of the mountains and flew at treetop level right over the town out into the valley floor. And, the first couple that I talked to, they had actually had drank some mushroom tea. So I thought, well, this sounds this sounds interesting, but obviously if their consciousnesses were otherwise engaged, perhaps they maybe imagined this. And so I kind of discounted it initially, but then I heard from other people that they too had seen something, and these folks hadn't been imbibing at the time. So I thought, well, maybe there's something to this. And at the time I was writing for the little Crestone Eagle newspaper that was a monthly that came out there, and I was just starting there, and I thought, well, maybe this could be a good article, but I kind of discounted it again. And so I threw a New Year's Eve party that following December 31st, and towards the end of the party, there was about 30 or so, 40 people there. I started listening in on little conversations around the house, and it seemed like everybody was talking about seeing these orbs or ovals that had come down out of the mountains the prior November. And so this kind of excited me, and I thought, wow, maybe there's really something to this. So I started interviewing people separately, went to the publisher of the paper and said, hey, we had this event. I think there's something to it. And she said, well, sure, how about a little 500-word article and, maybe do some research and stuff. And so I set about for the 2 weeks prior to my deadline to look back to, the history of these types of events that had been reported in the San Luis Valley. And I was aware of the Snippy the horse case, the first documented, widely publicized animal mutilation case. I was aware of that from this 67. They had a wave of UFO activity back in the late 60s, but I thought all that was ancient history, that stuff like this hadn't been going on. And much to my surprise, I uncovered a Pandora's box of just amazing amounts of ebbing and flowing of activity. And none of this had ever been really coalesced together into, even a large magazine article or an extensive magazine article. And I kind of really early on, within a week, I realized, if I motivated myself, there was easily a book, if not more, worth of material there. And so my article ended up being 1,500 words. And by the time my second article came out, I was already being contacted by investigators all over the world. TV shows were calling me up, trying to pick my brain, and within 2 months I was on national television, and the thing just kind of it became Frankenstein's monster. It just grew a life of its own, and so for the next 10 years I really busted my tail running around investigating reports of unusual activity of all kinds, researching the Native American legends and myths and sacred traditions related to the area, talking with geologists and earth science folks to try to figure out if there was something about the actual physical makeup of the valley that may be contributing to some of this activity. And I really set about documenting all these reports. And essentially what I determined pretty early on was that all this stuff had been going on for years. It had never really gone away. Maybe it ebbed and flowed some, but there was never anybody there for people to actually talk to and to report this stuff to. And all of a sudden, now there was this guy who was willing to take people seriously, not ridicule them, and keep their names out of the press if they wanted, keep them anonymous. And these reports and witnesses just came out of the woodwork. And mayors of towns, ex-politicians, intelligence agents, livestock board inspectors, you name it. I mean, every type of person, housewives, students, farmers, ranchers, hippies, redneck conservatives. I mean, it ran the gamut of society. At one point or another, someone from each of these groups had unusual experiences, and were really gratified that there was somebody that was willing to sit down and discuss this with them. And I really put together quite an extensive database that has date, time, location, description of object, where the actual place or event took place, whether it made media coverage, whether a police or some type of official report was filed. And I compiled this very, very extensive database that documents all these cases that I investigated. And also I published a monthly little newsletter called the Mysterious Valley Report that I sent out for free to anyone who was interested in finding out more about my work. Towards the end, it got a little cumbersome. I published it for 6-7 years. I was sending out hundreds of these at my own expense, just as a kind of a public service. And,
Right.
10 years of work really went into this whole endeavor. I put 300,000 miles on my truck in 6 years. Of course, a lot of that was driving to gigs as well. But, I put a lot of time in on the road and investigated or researched outbreaks of around 200 animal death, livestock death cases, worked with a couple of veterinary pathologists, a veterinary college, a biophysical laboratory. I tried to approach it, as scientifically and as, how would I put this, as objectively as possible, and not jump to any conclusions. I do consider myself pretty skeptical about a lot of claims that are made out there, especially now with the internet. But I am open-minded, and I let the data kind of lead me in a particular direction. So in a nutshell, that's kind of what I did from 92 to 2002. It was about a 10-year period there.
And it's funny. I try to describe the San Luis Valley to people because I've been there a couple times. First of all, I try to describe how beautiful it is, but there's also something else about it there, and it's really is a magical place. It's again, it's beautiful. It's very it's remote. I mean, it's not as remote as people think. I mean, obviously there are cities and towns all along those highways, but it feels.
Well, yeah, there's one person for every 7 square miles.
Yeah, that's incredible.
And I had to travel 60 miles to get to the nearest stoplight, supermarket, clinic, movie theater, grocery store.
And
that's 120 miles round trip.
Right. And that's a big area. And how would you? One of the things that there are a lot of Native American legends associated with that area. Mm-hmm. When you started to do this and you started to dig and research, what were your first impressions of it? What was your? Obviously, you're finding out about the legends. You're finding out about the history of the area. What did you start to think about what you were dealing with as far as why was this area, there was so much high strangeness going on in this area?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I think the San Luis Valley, like a number of areas around North America and obviously around the world, tend to somehow be a strange attractor location that has a variety and intensity of unexplained occurrences that you don't find everywhere. There seems to be it seems to coalesce there for some reason. It's almost like the veil of reality has tears in it or is thin there. And there are other areas I could name. The Hudson River Valley has some very intriguing areas around White Sands, the Chiricahuas, around the Southern Yakima Indian Reservation up in Washington State. I could go down the list. The Sedona area ebbs and flows and seems to have some interesting activity flow through there. So I'm not saying the San Luis Valley is unique in this regard by any stretch, but it does seem to have a maybe a little extra special nature to it. It does sit on the backbone of America. It is also the location of the largest freshwater aquifer at altitude in North America. The valley It's if you I look at it geologically, I don't look at it politically. The political name of the valley from the Colorado border northward is the San Luis Valley, but it extends. The tongue of it extends down to Taos, and it's part of the Rio Grande River drainage to the Rio Grande Gorge there. And so I kind of look at it as the New Mexico portion south of the border as well, even though it's not officially known as the San Luis Valley. Geologically, it is all part of the same general bioregion, if you will. But I think that one of the things that I found out pretty early on doing some research into the geophysical properties of the valley is you have very interesting, you have trillions and trillions of gallons or billions of acre feet of water that lie underneath the valley and extends down many thousands of feet. And these sort of mini layers of water are sandwiched, by sediment, by clays and other material. And it's almost like you could almost look at it as almost like a natural battery. It has gravitational lows there because of the negative space underground. You have maximum field strength of the Earth's magnetic field in close proximity with minimum field strength. So you see these interaction seams being where a lot of UFO reports are reported. I've mapped out areas of high incidence, and they do seem to have some relationship, I think, between these magnetic interaction zones. I'm not a scientist. I know this sounds like pop science to some people, but I have done a fair amount of research, and I think the facts and the data is bolstered by by my database and actually plotting out where these events occur. And you start to see trends and patterns. And when you start bouncing those trends and patterns off Native American legends, the Tewa Pueblo people are at the southern end of the valley, to Taos Pueblo. Their place of emergence places itself up in the San Luis Lakes area in the middle of the valley, similar to the Hopi and Zuni legends of the place of emergence just by the confluence of the Colorado River and the Little Colorado Gorge there in the Grand Canyon. So you have some very interesting similarities there, and you also have legends of Masa, the god of death, or sergeant at arms for creator, lives inside the largest freestanding mountain in the world, San Antonio Peak, which is right below the border area there on the west side of the valley. And the legend is that when he comes out from underneath the mountain, he's real big and tall, hairy, and smells bad. So it's kind of hard not to take the leap that, hey, that sounds like your typical Bigfoot or Sasquatch description. So you start bouncing off the legends and the myths and looking at the patterning of activity. 7 Bigfoot sightings were reported in a very short period of time, like a week, 8 days, right around San Antonio Mountain. And you start correlating these things together, and you come up with some pretty interesting correlations. And that's what I attempted to really show in my 3 books about the valley. The first 2 books kind of document my investigative process as it unfolds, and then the 3rd book is kind of the story of how I my thinking evolved, and how some cases look to be pivotal cases to me in hindsight, and so Secrets of the Mysterious Valley is really showing the process that I underwent to not only cherry pick the good cases, but also investigate and network with other investigators around the area. So I didn't do it to make money or to become famous. I did it because it really needed to be done. I felt that this was a perfect sociological petri dish that needed to be examined and communicated out to the community. And I'm pretty proud of those books. The first book went through, I think, 10 printings. Was in print for 12 years. A lot of people have read it, and as you noticed, Jack, at the beginning of the first 2 books, I list out 13 suggested rules of investigation that I expected my readers to hold me to. And you don't see very many people stating out front what their parameters are. And I felt that was really important, so that people didn't think that I had some agenda other than trying to get to the truth.
Right, and that's very important, and it shows that your journalism background and the objective approach. Let me ask, how did your thinking evolve for our listeners? How over the course of this time, how did your thinking evolve based on what you were finding out?
Well, it happened real fast. Of course, initially I thought aliens were coming from other planets. They were, targeting and victimizing our livestock, abducting people, flying around with impunity in our skies with exotic, high-tech equipment from other star systems. And within about 3 weeks, I knew that was a far too simplistic answer or avenue to entertain as the truth. And I had to take several big steps back and allow the data to unfold and color and sort of lead my thinking. I feel we're dealing with something infinitely more involved than the simple explanation of ETs. I think most, if not all, of this activity is closed system. It's all a product of our biosphere. I have a sense that if there's any aliens involved in the scenario, we're probably the aliens, because whatever it is has probably been here longer than we have. And I kind of freak people out when they say, "Oh, you're the guy that believes in aliens." And I said, "Well, wait a minute. How do you know we're not the aliens and they're more terrestrial than we are?" People, I think, because of the media, because of this pop culture front-loading and programming that we all undergo, vis-a-vis the internet, TV, books, and that sort of thing. I think a lot of us have been sort of lulled into this place of just accepting the fact that, we're important enough for ETs to come and pick up rocks and flowers for 40 years like they've never seen them before. There's so much absurdity and nonsensical data that just does not conform to a spacefaring civilization coming here. So I immediately, within weeks, a couple, 3 weeks, I realized that there was a far more involved and complicated scenario at work, and that really crystallized in my mind with the yellow helicopter event, which I still say that's when I kissed the tar baby.
Well, tell everyone about that.
Well, yeah, in a nutshell, I was given a handful of 24 photographs by the county sheriff when I inquired about cattle mutilation reports in my county, Saguache County, which, according to all the researchers into the cattle mutilation phenomenon for, at that point about 20 plus years, there had been no official reports in my county. And lo and behold, the sheriff shows up at my house with 24 photographs, only 2 of which had any writing on them. Within 2 or 3 days, I was able, with the help of one of the deputies who investigated these cases back in the 70s and early 80s, I was able to ID all the ranches, contact the ranchers, get the facts about their particular cases, and found out that there had been a minimum of at least 20 cases in Saguache County, as opposed to the 0 that everyone previously had thought from the outside looking in. And the closest of these cases happened on June 6, 1980. Of course, this is 13 years later that I'm contacting the rancher, Virginia Sutherland, in the next town over. I selected that case to investigate first because it was only about 14 miles from my house. So I went out there, set up an appointment, and the family described sitting down to dinner back in 1980, and as they were starting dinner, they heard a helicopter fly very low over their house, coming from the north, headed south. And they thought, well, it was a little strange, but they didn't get up and bother to go out and look for it. And it appeared the sound disappeared, but then about 20 minutes later, they heard it again, and it sounded like it was rising up out of their field about a mile or so away to the south. And so they ran outside, and this thing flew right over their house. It was right at dusk, but there was still plenty of light. They described it as a mustard yellow color. It looked like one of those prototype sort of MASH style helicopters from the late 40s, early 50s, like a U-47 with the external fuel tanks, and they had no markings on it. It was this weird yellow color, and it flew right, they claim about 50 feet over their head. So they got a really good look at it as it flew back from the south to the north, where it had come from. And so they thought, wow, this is kind of weird. wondered what he was doing out in our field. And so the next morning, they went out to the field, and their prize seed bull was mutilated about a mile from their house. And so the family's telling me this 13 years later, and I'm, recording and scribbling notes and recording on a tape recorder. And I said, well, could you take me out there? And they said, sure. And we went out there, and there the thing was still there in the field 13 years later. Of course, it kind of melted into the field. I took the head home and ended up painting it and sticking it on my wall. But so I thanked them, and I went home after the interviews. And the following morning, I was sitting at my table, dining room table, typing up my notes, and I heard this sound of a helicopter. And I look out my dining room window, and this mustard yellow ancient U-47 flew right over my house, and had 5 other witnesses to it. And I just, for some reason, that really had a major impact on my thinking. That was the first time I really got a sense of the tricksterish nature of a lot of these types of events, and that there was some weird synchronistic reflective quality about these types of reports, and that this was a blatant example of it was a blatant motivation for me to really broaden my thinking, become more open-minded, and start approaching these subjects from a more out-of-the-box perspective, because this left no doubt in my mind that there was something infinitely more complicated than aliens coming to gather lip and eye stew or parts for udder souffle or something. It just that I've never really felt it since then, that particular theory or answer to this activity is valid. I think there's something much more complicated going on.
Right. Yeah, and exactly. No less profound. I mean, I think that sometimes people get upset because they want to believe in certain things. It fits into their paradigm, and I've been guilty of that. I'd like to think that sometimes I think, well, it'd be great if there were extraterrestrial beings that had some part in some of these things, and that still might be the case. But you hear a lot. You hear interdimensional, you hear extra-dimensional, you hear paranormal. Like you were saying, kind of like this psychological, not hallucinations, but basically part of our psyche, part of our basic makeup, and again, no less profound though.
Well, in fact, probably more profound, because
exactly.
if we're seeing, let's say, a collective subconscious manifestation of real physical events, nuts and bolts events, then the power of the collective human psyche is a lot more important than religions, spiritual systems of science. All these things are missing the boat. There may be something infinitely more amazing going on, and it could possibly have to do with the collective on some unconscious or superconscious level, somehow manifesting inadvertently or by some sort of weird collective design, manifesting real nuts and bolts events. It's almost, my mentor David Perkins, who has been a real just rock of Gibraltar for me over 20 years, really altered how I looked at these things, really supported my out-of-the-box thinking. He equates the cattle mutilations, for instance, as possibly being a form of cultural stigmata, that we know collectively how detrimental these animals are to the environment, and perhaps collectively we're trying to warn ourselves away from utilizing cattle as a protein source. This is the kind of out-of-the-box thinking I think is needed in this field to get over the alien stomp on creative thinking and really take this thing to the next level. I think 60 years of spinning our wheels, for instance, in ufology should be telling us that, hey, it's broke. What did Einstein say when they asked him what is your definition of insanity? He said, doing the same thing the same way over and over again, expecting a different result. And after 60 years, perhaps our methodology and our thinking is wrong. We should really get creative. And I've been a champion of creative thinking. People have held this against me in the field. I've been a bit of a pariah. I'm an outsider in a field that's considered outside of culture. So it's tough being an outsider to outsiders. It's lonely out here in the hinterlands. But I'm not doing this because of any sort of lust for result. I kind of resign myself to the fact that I'll probably never figure any of this stuff out in my lifetime. But I'm sure going to give it a good try and leave behind some what I would like to believe is some pretty insightful, creative, out of the box thinking.
Right, and you have to be, you have to be objective, and you have to be open-minded, because people, when we talk about the high strangeness, and that's what people don't realize, especially with a place like the San Luis Valley, we're talking about not only UFO reports, we're talking about, like you said, Bigfoot type creatures, we're talking about cattle mutilations, the strange helicopters. I remember when we were talking before about, when I was there for that day with one of your associates, and he showed me a montage of drawings of the kinds of creatures that people had seen over and over again in that region. And I was blown away. I mean, you're talking about angel-like creatures, leprechaun-like creatures, you name it. There were these
trooping fairies, these weird undulating transparent forms that I've dubbed prairie dragons. I've had reports from an internationally famous artist, painter, whose his work hangs in very prestigious collections, describing what appears to be just slightly manifest 30-foot tall humanoid forms crashing through the pinon trees around his house. I mean, the list goes on and on and on, and you really have to pinch yourself sometimes when you're going around there listening to very credible people tell you incredible things. It's right. I've only been punked once or twice in all those years. I think rural areas, people tend to be more upfront and honest, and they do know their natural environment. Ranchers do know when they're looking at a dead cow, for the most part, what didn't do it, as opposed to the mystery of what did. And I think far too often people in rural areas are kind of, I don't know, stereotyped as kind of dumb, not knowing what's going on around them. And I found the exact opposite to be true. I think urban people tend to be a little bit more easily swayed and led by the nose, and rural people tend to be a lot more grounded, a lot more down to earth, and a lot more objective in their view of their reality. And so, it was a real pleasure being able to work with a fairly extensive network of what I felt were very, very credible observers.
Right. And, I think, too, one of the things is that, I wanted to ask you this before. We're going to get into your newer books, because I find that you go into some very interesting things in those books. What, you had mentioned earlier about the geographic features of the area and of the region, and also, the whole idea, the electromagnetic kind of pulls and forces and things like that. One of the things that's come up in conversation before that I've talked to people is they talk about, well, one thing that might explain the variety of things that people see could be almost like these interdimensional portals where it's like you say, it opens Pandora's box, and that would explain the variety of these things coming from.
Yeah, potentially, yeah. I mean, yeah. On
but
the
that's
surface,
one. Again, that's just I don't want to put it into that box, but yeah, fascinating. And I want to ask you one question before we move on to I want to talk about Stalking the Tricksters.
Yeah.
What was your most profound experience during that 10-year period? Was it the helicopter?
That was the initial one, yeah. I wouldn't know where to begin with some of the cases that just totally just befuddled and just astounded me. But I think it was real pivotal, that helicopter event, because that immediately alerted me that my narrow swath of thinking was not appropriate, and I needed to expand my awareness and my thinking, and get more creative and look at things, from more of an out of the box perspective, because there is no one size fits all answer to these riddles, and there may be connecting points, and I kind of had a hunch early on that there was some sort of tricksterish element that was at work and play in a lot of these events. Inexplicable coincidences, the synchronistic elements within the culture, for instance, and within nature. Oftentimes during sighting waves, we'd have, outbreaks of just enormous amounts of roadkill, or mysterious fires, or bizarre weather, tornadoes in a couple of instances, which shouldn't exist in the San Luis Valley at 7,000 feet. I need to remind your listeners, we're talking about a high alpine valley that sits at an average of 7,500 feet above sea level, and the mountains go up another 8,000 feet. So, this area is not, doesn't have the meteorological elements needed most of the time to create tornadoes at that
right. It's not Tornado Alley, right? Exactly.
Not Tornado Alley, and when you have tornadoes breaking out with a UFO sighting wave and mysterious fires and in one weekend, my God, we had a wedding where the sister of the bride was the maid of honor, and she knifed her sister, the bride, to death at the reception, and 12, bizarre fires that had broken out, and roadkill littering the roads. And I'm thinking to myself, what is going on here? There's got to be some sort of tricksterish connection here. And so early on, I think the helicopter event did alert me to a synchronistic kind of sleight of hand tricksterish element, which then I really explored in Stalking the Tricksters, and I looked cross-culturally all around the world at all the hundreds and hundreds of trickster forms that are found in every culture. There's maybe one or two that don't have what could be identified as a trickster character. And I set about looking at the classic anthropological view of the trickster, as stated by people like Paul Radin and Carl Jung back in the 40s and 50s. Just the term itself, we don't know where it comes from. The earliest use of the term, for instance, Paul Radin, who was one of the early experts on the trickster in the 50s, he tried to backtrack that term and found it referred to, but never found the actual reference that was referred to. So even the very term itself is tricksterish. So
right.
This book, I attempted to look for commonalities, for connecting points, for things that all these various trickster forms around the world and throughout time in these cultures, how they possibly maybe shared something in common. And what was a real breakthrough, I think, in my thinking is I came to realize that they all are associated with shape-shifting, manifesting in one form and then shifting over and manifesting in a different form, physically and metaphorically. And this to me was a real important sort of, aha moment for me. And that gave me something that I could then look for that particular shape-shifting quality and see how that dovetailed between one tricksterish form and another. And the book is an attempt to use that commonality and kind of use it as a possible mechanism that triggers divergent events and convergent events, if you will, and could possibly connect these different types of events together. And so I look at the trickster energy not so much as a personification or an anthropomorphization of an animal, or like Raven and Coyote or tricksters, the Great Hare in the Plains traditions, the Kappas, the Alekis down in the Maya lands. All these various trickster forms have this ability to shapeshift. So in looking at this, I thought, well, perhaps this is a mechanism that somehow ties these things together. And of course, the book slowly unpeels that theory and exposes it and bounces some creative thinking around.
The unified field theory.
Well, I kind of have used that term as a joke, but is a kind of a tongue-in-cheek joke. But in essence, I really do feel that there is some sort of mechanism that is tied to the toppling of static structures, the creation within control systems, toppling them to create room for growth and creativity. The trickster in its classic definition is neither male or female, young or old, positive or negative. It's amoral. It's like a 3-year-old beating his little sister on the head with a baseball bat and getting punished and not realizing, that what he was doing was wrong. Uh, I've often joked that, hey, if it's not young or old, male or female, it tends to dance really well. Perhaps, Michael Jackson was a
Right.
trickster. Uh, anyway, all joking aside, that's the classic view of the trickster, that it has no agenda, that it doesn't realize what it's doing, and that one of the inadvertent effects of its activities is that it benefits humanity with technology. Like Loki, the Scandinavian trickster, stole the fishing hook from the gods and gave it to humans. Raven created light out of darkness. You can go through the list of trickster forms, and many of them do provide technology inadvertently to humans. Oftentimes, they're punished for this. So, I divided up my tricksters into three categories. The most ancient, which are the anthropomorphized animals that tend to change nature to help mankind. The tragic heroes like Prometheus stealing fire from the gods and being punished by the eagle pecking out his liver every day, and it heals, and then it comes back and pecks his liver out again. And in some of these stories, I think they're allegories for some other interesting kind of elements. But the third type of trickster, we have the anthropomorphized animal, the tragic hero. The third is a more modern version, a shamanic trickster. An example would be Bernie Madoff, who tricked X amount of people out of $2 billion. Or you can look at some of the false flag events that have been touted by conspiracy theorists through the years, and there's tricksterish qualities behind some of these events. So, in the process of defining these and breaking these tricksters into these three groups, I all of a sudden started to realize that perhaps humankind has progressed technologically so much that we are now inadvertently supplying the trickster mechanism with technology. And of course, the first thing that came to mind was perhaps the trickster is becoming self-aware, and because of that, perhaps it is beginning to have an agenda, that it is becoming slowly self-directed. And if that's so, then the logical place that the trickster would be lurking and hiding would be in the internet, because we've supplied the perfect hiding place for a slowly emerging self-awareness that has tricksterish qualities about it. So the book was a real exercise in deductive logic in some ways, and in other ways, kind of taking leaps of theoretical leaps, if you will. And the chapter 0, of course, 0 is a number of the trickster. It's like the 0 card in tarot, for instance, is the Fool. And so the Fool is a classic trickster form. In the modern age, the trickster has almost been marginalized to the point of non-existence. The Christian Church, of course, marginalized the trickster and said it was negative and it was the devil, or it was demons. They took away its amoral nature and said it's bad, it's negative. There's examples all through cultures marginalizing the trickster, and so I think in today's world, the closest we come to having vestiges of that trickster in clowns, for instance, the Harlequin. Ronald McDonald is a modern version of a trickster form, tricking little kids into eating hamburgers. And you can go down the list of these kind of faint sort of echoes of the primordial trickster forms that are reflected in our culture today. What do we do on Halloween? We go out trick or treating, right?
Right.
We dress up in costumes. Masquerade balls, masks, costumes. These are all modern vestiges of the ancient trickster forms, and so it was a difficult book to write. Chapter 0, I probably went through an entire jar of ibuprofen, because writing that chapter was very, very difficult, and it made my head hurt. And as a result of that, breakthrough of identifying shapeshifting as a common element, then it got easier. But I'll tell you, boy, that first chapter was pretty difficult. It's hard to describe something that's neither here nor there, young or old, male or female, negative or positive. It's very difficult to conceptually to address that and try to communicate that to people. So,
Right. Very challenging. You know, sometimes I think, and we live in such a tangible kind of world. Let me see it, let me feel it, let me touch it. Sometimes when you talk about stuff like this, it makes you think that maybe something's not going to necessarily be solved. That, in other words, it's not going to be this big announcement of, we now know that Bigfoot is or we now know that UFOs are. I wonder if it's just because of our evolution, we just become part of. There's really, that never happens, but it just becomes part of what we become. I know it's hard to explain, but do you see what I'm saying? Like, in other words,
yeah, I do, and you could take that one step further and suggest that possibly the actual biosphere itself, Gaia, if you will, the planet, Mother Earth, for lack of a better term, perhaps Mother Earth has an agenda, and that agenda is to trick us to finally leave the nest and go out and see the cosmos before an asteroid hits or the sun goes supernova. So we may, and this is one possibility, but we may be seeing a tricksterish agenda to get us off planet and get us out there seeding the stars with our gene pool as a basic survival strategy. So when you talk to your average ufologist and you start, riffing around on concepts like this, their eyes glaze over. They start scratching in places that are itching, but they can't find where the itch is. You really need to look at this whole scenario as a potential agenda. Really, there seems to be causality happening that has purpose to it. And even though all these things seem divergent, not connected, they may be part of a whole cloth agenda that has, our survival in mind. And whether it's us collectively tricking ourselves, or whether it's the planet trying to, be a breath of wind to a dandelion and blow those seeds out into the surrounding area to propagate. These are not the types of approaches and thinking that you run across out there in this marginalized pop culture, disinformation laden morass that you find on TV and in many books and on the internet, especially. This is really looking at this thing four-dimensionally as opposed to two-dimensionally, and that's the kind of thinking that really inspires me. People like Jacques Vallée, I could go down a list. John Keel. I mentioned my friend David Perkins. You could go into academia and even find examples. Carl Jung, for instance. These are the kinds of thinkers that excite me the most, because they're looking at these divergent topics with a fresh pair of glasses on. And that's, if I accomplish anything in my work, it's to inspire other people to be creative in their thinking and to become a little bit more circumspect about really buying into what the culture is trying to program us to believe. And as soon as you use that word believe, and that's a word that you will rarely see ever in any of my books, or hear me use that word, I believe this or I believe that. I don't believe any of this. I just let the data suggest trends, possibilities, potential answers, but to actually, I guess, suspend my disbelief and just accept something at face value. That's just not my approach, and I've become more hardened in that stance as the years have gone by. I've actually become kind of cantankerous when it comes to that. When I hear people say, "Well, I believe it's this" or "I believe it's that," I just look at them and say, "Well, okay, whatever floats your dinghy."
Right. And I think that has part to do with the fact that you're so thorough and there's so by the we might it's a good segue actually to get into Stalking the Herd because this book, when I started reading it, you're immediately you take me back to Samaria and 4,000 years ago with cows, and I'm like, whoa, this is going to be good because my
Well,
thinking
actually, I
was
started about 30,000 years ago, but who's
exactly
counting?
right. You go, you're. It's just like this is going to be a very thorough, comprehensive examination of this phenomenon.
Well, our relationship with cattle, that's
Exactly right, and I don't even think people think about that at all when they think about cattle mutilations.
oh no.
So, what made you decide to? Obviously, you had a lot of experience with cattle mutilations over the years, but why this book? What was your thinking?
Well, that's really the answer to that is pretty direct and simple. I've just become really disenchanted with one-dimensional thinking about this subject that has run roughshod over the field for 30 years. Certain investigators have been touting this alien gathering genetic material scenario, which absolutely makes no sense at all to me. This type of thinking has really, totally mesmerized anyone with even the slightest interest in this field, other than skeptics that say it's all scavengers and there's nothing to see here, move along. I think the book slam dunks that particular assertion back in the debunker's faces, gleefully, I might add, in some cases when I have real good science to back up the high strangeness of cases. But I think it's important for people to realize that they've been led down the primrose path with this whole aliens are coming in and mutilating our livestock. I don't think the data supports that as a one-size-fits-all answer. In fact, the cases that you can tout that would support that conclusion are extremely few and very rare compared to all the other thousands and thousands of cases. So one of the things that I realized going in was that no comprehensive book had ever been written that objectively looked at this particular mystery. And because I had been involved for over 20 years in this investigative and research process, I had become friends with a number of investigators over the years who've been involved in this, and they all had databases, but none of them had really ever been published, and they all were stovepipes sitting side by side, and no one had ever taken the time or the effort to take all these databases and put them together. And so once I did that, even David and a couple of other, grizzled veterans of this mystery were just awestruck at how it's just how bewildering the unfolding waves of cases in the 70s, for instance, how bewildering they were. Up to 8 states, I think, in one 24-hour period had claims of livestock mutilations. And I thought it was really important not only to get these databases all coalesced together, but to actually look at cattle and their relationship, symbiotic relationship with humans. And of course, that relationship starts, with some of your first cave paintings. The earliest known depictions of animals or art by humans show bovines. And so that was where I really wanted to start, looking at the sacred tradition for thousands of years that we had surrounding bulls and cows. And still today in India, you have the sacredness of the cow and the bull. Where there are no mutilation reports, by the way, and the sacred Indian cows, the Brahmas, I haven't found a single mutilation of a Brahma anywhere in the world, and there's lots of Brahmas around the world. So I think there's some clues in there. I think that we're looking at something that's infinitely more complex than the simplistic answer of gathering genetic material to hybridize some dying ET race. I mean, my common answer to people who tout that is, well, why don't they just go to a slaughterhouse, pick the lock, walk through the wall, whatever, and gather as much genetic material as they could possibly want? Why do they want to get Bessie on Farmer Brown's ranch in southern Colorado? So
Right.
it appears to me there's an environmental monitoring program going on. That's I can safely say that if I had to use the B word, believe, I believe that that is a very viable theory, and it's the one that has the most sticking power of all the theories that I propose in the book.
Okay. I want to quote. This is a great paragraph in the book, and I wanted to share it. It's great. It this is you talking about what this is. You say, it appears to me that we are dealing with a netherworld of shadowy characters that are acting upon and maintaining overlapping agendas that reverberate on deep archetypal levels within Western Christian culture. This process of mutilations appears to exist within a cultural feedback loop of denial, even outright dismissal. This pattern of cultural dismissal and or denial is exacerbated by the sensational popularized interpretation that cattle mutilations are an alien harvest. I thought that was really a very telling paragraph. I love that. That's great stuff.
Well, I mean, come on. Anytime you have an argument, if there's only one side that's shouting everything else down, it's no argument at all. There's no you don't really have a chance to propose any other thinking. And this book is an attempt to look at all the various theories that have been proposed over the years and really present the data that supports and refutes each of these theories. There is no one theory that can account for cases that occurred back in 1606 in around London. Hundreds of sheep were being mutilated during the time of Shakespeare and Guy Fawkes and James I rewriting the Christian Bible. It's just, I'm sorry, government monitoring of the environment wasn't going on and during the times of James I. So, there
Right.
are high strange cases that we can't explain scientifically. I don't care what the debunkers say. It appears that there is a very systematic agenda at work here. We see time and time again commonalities between cases that have been reported all over the Western Christian world. I need to stress that this is a Christian country phenomenon, and I really thought it was important for people to really be given a comprehensive look at this from a objective point of view, and not me banging a drum trying to convince people that my particular pet theory was correct.
Right. And you do go into, and it's a disturbing part of the book towards the end, but it's important. When you start talking about all of the negative things associated with the cattle, that's the state of the beef, the beef that we eat, the proteins, the amount of cattle on Earth, that I was blown away with all the information that you had in there. But it's a serious health threat to consumers. And again, I'm going to read one more thing that you say, because it blew me away. It was really disturbing, but you have to really stop and think about this. You say, in case you didn't know, the list of products that utilize spare cattle parts is huge. Here is just a partial sampling of these products and categories: deodorants, shampoo, cream rinses, detergents, shaving cream, doggy chews, soaps, fabric softeners, textiles, floor wax, toothpaste, glue, upholstery, insecticides, violin strings, gelatin for drug capsules, insulin, and then you get into a ton of different medicines and pharmaceuticals. That's disturbing. That
Yeah, but
really
it's
is.
true.
It's just very disturbing.
It's true. What's
Right.
also very interesting to me too is that all 1.37 billion head of cattle on the planet, science has now proven to some degree that all these animals are derived from a single herd of 80 animals of an extinct species called the aurochs that were somehow domesticated 10,500 years ago. That to me is a mind-blowing statistic. 940 something different separate breeds of cattle. It's just staggering. The unceremonious industrialized ritual that goes on in these super slaughterhouses and these huge feedlot operations where cattle are hustled in and out of these feedlots as quickly as possible by feeding them 1,600 pounds of grain just to add 400 pounds of weight, grain that they're not really designed, their bodies are not designed to properly assimilate and metabolize. 80% of the antibiotics used in this country go into cattle. A high percentage, I think 60% of growth hormones go into cattle. The antibiotics are to protect them when they're standing around in 2 feet of effluent and feces and urine, and then the growth hormones are trying to speed up the growth process so you can get them out of those unsanitary conditions that you have to keep applying antibiotics to keep the animals, and I use this term loosely, healthy. And these plants, I mean, you're talking industrialized slaughter on a scale that the average person would just be horrified knowing that 400 animals an hour are processed through these operations. Beef is a status symbol. We have countries that are struggling to become affluent, rise out of the third world, and one of those status symbols is being able to eat beef. Go out and have a steak. And the more countries become affluent and you start to see emerging middle classes, the more beef is going to be required. And it's just a slippery slope that there's no end in sight. And unfortunately, cattle are one of the, well, how would I put this? Besides humans, they're the most detrimental life force on the planet. They're the single biggest cause of freshwater pollution, the single largest cause of the creation of deserts, the single biggest reason why we're cutting down the rainforest to make room for more cattle. The list goes on and on and on. I mean, just the amount of methane that these things burp and fart every 2 minutes, all 1.37 billion of them, is tons and tons, millions of tons of methane gas that is detrimental to the ozone layer, and it's helping destroy that protective layer that's protecting us from nasty ultraviolet radiation. So we can't continue utilizing cattle as a protein source for much longer. And this book is a gentle reminder that this particular downward slope is untenable, and at some point we're going to have to come to grips with the fact that cattle are slowly, actually quickly degrading our environmental, surroundings here. So these are important issues that most people, when they think cattle mutilation, they want aliens coming down and gathering genetic parts and stuff, and the actual subject is far more involved and far more disturbing, as you put it correctly.
Right. So the idea that the government could be monitoring the situation, and that would be an explanation for at least some of the mutilations, it does make sense.
Yep. Well, and that's not even beginning to talk about transmissible spongiform encephalopathy or mad cow disease, Creutzfeldt-Jakob's disease in humans, scrapie in sheep, chronic wasting disease in wildlife, deer and elk. These are 100% fatal diseases that make AIDS look like a mild cold. This is a huge covered up health issue. There's some evidence to suggest that this may have been an escaped effort to weaponize a rare form of TSE back in the 50s and 60s, and it may have gotten loose into the environment. It gets into some kind of cloak and dagger areas of biological weapons development and other things that are the average person really would rather they not have to deal with these types of subjects, as long as they can go into the supermarket, buy some chopped meat on a piece of styrofoam covered in plastic, out of sight, out of mind. They don't care how it got there. If everybody in this country took a course to train them and educate them about what happens from the breeding process to the delivery to the grocery store, everything that happens in between, all the steps, a lot of people would become instant vegetarians.
Well, I mean, it makes the beef industry as a whole is like a crime against humanity, really.
Well,
I
eat beef. Okay, I just want to give the caveat. I don't want to turn out to be the next Oprah here and get sued for $2 billion. Eat all the hamburgers you want, folks.
But, well, yeah, but I mean, there are
where it comes from.
the consequences are just, that's fascinating. Really fascinating. And again, I want to commend you for that. That book is just so, I mean, when you're done with that book, you will know everything you ever needed or wanted to know about not only cattle mutilations, but everything about cows and cattle and bovine, and it's all there. So, well, let me ask you, Chris, what are you working on now? What's going on?
Well, I'm unfortunately, because I tried to encompass this entire mystery into one book. If I had included everything that I was ready to include, it would have been close to 1,000 pages. And unfortunately, my publisher started pre-selling the book for $19.95 as a 350-page book. It's now 650 pages, and I left out all the informed opinions, the analysis by scientists, law enforcement, other investigators. I had to leave all that stuff out. So I'm working on a follow-up book with David Perkins that's going to look at Stalking the Herd as the mud thrown against the wall, and we're going to analyze what sticks and where the commonalities are and which particular memes and culture have, staying power, whether it's the Satanists are involved doing it, the government's involved, it's aliens, there's nothing to it, it's all media-induced hysteria. We're going to look at all these theories, look at the pros that support the theory, and then look at the cons that refute it, and really do a thorough analysis of the data that's all in that Stalking the Herd book.
I love it. Well, I look forward to reading that. That's great. What's the timeline on that, do you think?
Yeah, that was all garbled there, by the way.
Oh, I'm sorry. What is the time? Can you hear me?
Yeah, it's all distorted, and there's a slapback echo.
Okay. Every show we get around this time, this happens. It's really weird. About an hour and 10 minutes into it, this happens. Can you hear me now?
It's the same.
Okay.
Can you reestablish the call? Can you do that, or?
That would be. That's the problem with that is it disconnects and then it's disjointed. It should literally. What's funny about this is that it should be okay in about 10 seconds. So, and then
that trickster again.
What's that?
It's the trickster again.
That's what everyone says. Is there's something. It's either the government or the trickster or something. How can you hear me now?
It's the same.
Okay.
I can hear you. I can understand you, but it's distorted and echoey.
Okay. How can let's tell people how they can purchase your books and where they can go to learn more about you and your work.
Well, I do have a website, Our Strange Planet. I've kind of let it kind of go a little bit lax because I've been so busy lately with all the promotion and stuff that goes into trying to get a word about this particular book out. But I'm going to really be diving back into the website. It's OurStrangePlanet.com. Also, I am co-host of the radio program, The Paracast. You can go to theparacast.com. We have an extensive online forum community with a bunch of people way smarter than me on there. I'm happy to say I learn something every time I tune into the forums there. I'm a moderator there. Of course, the Paracast is on every Sunday night. Our archives are free. We have close to 400 shows. Everyone from Jacques Vallée, Jerry Clark, Jim Mosley, people that normally don't do radio shows do for some reason like to visit our show from time to time. We have Stanton Friedman will be our show here the first week of August, and you can always again find me at OurStrangePlanet.com, and the book is available there. If you'd like a signed, numbered copy of the first edition, that's where you would get it. The book will be more expensive, I think, when the second printing comes out. So that's pretty much it.
Great. And let me ask, because I really like to ask, especially people like you who have really been investigating this for a while and really have been on this journey. We talked a little bit about it, how it has changed you from the standpoint that you don't really say you believe in anything. That there's so much to it, and there are so many elements and factors involved. What would be your message to our listeners and to your readers and viewers, to as far as this is concerned, how should they approach this? How should they look at this?
Well, it's really pretty simple. You really need to do your own research. You need to select the kinds of thinkers that you feel have the most credibility, that have the most depth to the quality of their thinking, and do your own research. Don't believe it because you saw it on TV or you read it on a blog. Be very discriminating about your sources, but be open-minded and entertain all potential possibilities. And really, you got to put the time in. You really have to read the books. You have to study attendant subjects to the particular subject you're interested in, and it really takes a full scope, whole cloth approach to really get to a point where you're going to make some headway and possibly give us some new insight into these many mysteries that you discuss on your show and I do on mine. Some young guy out there, I'm hoping, is going to be inspired enough by my work to take that ball and chug it on down the field. I'm just hoping that I can inspire, listeners and readers to do their own work and to really look at things from an objective, out of the box way. And I think there's no substitute for that.
Yeah, and that's a great motivation. No, that's I commend you for that. I really do, and I can't thank you enough for coming on the show. I've known about you for a long time. I've read your work for a long time, and it's been a pleasure speaking with you. I really think that, obviously you're going to continue to do what you do, and I think we'll all be better off for it, because I think that, again, you're sharing very well-researched and documented information that I think people need to know about. And there's going to be
thank you.
No, absolutely. Yeah, no, it's really been a pleasure. And let's keep in touch. I really would like to do that, and we
Sure.
can have you back on. We can talk about some of the newer projects that you're working on and updates and things like that.
Yeah. I've got a bunch of pokers in the fire. I've got a number of research projects that I'm involved with right now. Plus, I'm helping out a number of TV shows. One of my goals is to try to somehow get around this pop culture programming that these TV shows are engaged in, and really try to get some of these shows to do it properly, because I'm in video and I do production work, and I'm really trying to slowly get these people to start doing it correctly, because they're doing it the wrong way.
That would be a major shift. I mean, that would be a great thing, because it seems
exactly.
that TV's rough.
Yeah, it is, and I've got a lot of experience getting sandpapered by some of these film school students in their early 20s, coming out of film school not knowing one thing about the subject they've been asked to research, and it's infinitely frustrating.
All right, no, I know. I've been there with some of the ghost stuff, and it is very frustrating. But good luck with that. Good. We'll all be appreciative if you are able to help to change that around. Chris, thanks again, and we'll have you on again soon.
Cool, man. Thanks, Jack. I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.